8 years ago, Sarah Mitchell disappeared after leaving her evening shift at a downtown Portland coffee shop, leaving behind nothing but questions and a family shattered by uncertainty. The 24-year-old barista had been saving money for nursing school, working double shifts and living with her parents to cut expenses. Her dreams were simple but concrete: help people heal, build a stable future, and maybe travel to Europe someday with the savings she'd been carefully accumulating in her bedroom drawer. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and evidence. That October evening in 2018, Sarah clocked out at exactly 9:47 p.m., just as she had done hundreds of times before. The security cameras captured her usual routine: removing her apron, saying goodbye to her co-worker Marcus, and walking toward the employee exit with her burgundy backpack slung over one shoulder. She wore her favorite denim jacket and the worn sneakers she'd had since college. The footage shows her checking her phone one last time before pushing through the back door into the Portland night. Her disappearance plunged the Mitchell family into a nightmare that seemed to have no end. David, then 28 and working as a junior marketing analyst, watched his parents transform before his eyes. His father, Robert, a methodical accountant who had always believed that every problem had a logical solution, became obsessed with creating timelines and theories. He covered the walls of his home office with maps, police reports, and printed social media posts, desperately searching for patterns that might lead to his daughter. His mother, Linda, quit her job as a school secretary to dedicate herself entirely to the search, spending her days calling shelters, hospitals, and police departments across multiple states. The Portland Police Bureau initially treated Sarah's case with standard missing person protocols. Detective Maria Santos, assigned to the case, conducted interviews with family members, friends, and co-workers. They examined her phone records, bank statements, and social media activity, finding nothing unusual in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Sarah had no history of mental health issues, no romantic entanglements that seemed problematic, and no financial troubles that might motivate a voluntary disappearance. She was, by all accounts, a responsible young woman with clear goals and strong family ties. The investigation revealed that Sarah had withdrawn $40 from an ATM near her workplace at 6:15 p.m. that evening, money she likely intended to use for gas and groceries over the weekend. Her car, a 2014 Honda Civic, was found 3 days later in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner 15 miles outside the city. The keys were still in the ignition, her purse was on the passenger seat with the $40 still inside, and there were no signs of struggle or forced entry. Security cameras at the diner showed her car arriving at approximately 11:20 p.m., but the footage was too grainy to identify who was driving. The community rallied around the Mitchell family with an intensity that surprised even longtime residents. Volunteers organized search parties that combed through forests, abandoned buildings, and riverbanks. Local businesses donated food and supplies, while social media groups dedicated to finding Sarah grew to include thousands of members sharing tips, theories, and words of encouragement. Yellow ribbons appeared on trees throughout the city, and Sarah's photograph became a familiar sight on telephone poles and storefront windows. But as weeks turned into months without any substantial leads, the police investigation began to slow. Detective Santos continued following up on tips and potential sightings, but the trail had gone cold. The family hired a private investigator, former police detective James Crawford, who retraced all the official steps and interviewed additional witnesses. Crawford's investigation lasted 6 months and cost the Mitchells their entire savings, but it yielded no new information about Sarah's whereabouts. The lack of answers created a rift in how different people coped with the uncertainty. David threw himself into work, earning promotion after promotion while privately battling insomnia and anxiety attacks. He moved from Portland to Seattle, then to Chicago, always telling himself that distance might help him process the trauma more effectively. Robert became increasingly isolated, convinced that law enforcement had missed crucial evidence and that only he could solve the mystery of his daughter's disappearance. Linda channeled her grief into advocacy, joining support groups for families of missing persons and volunteering with organizations that aided in search efforts. The case officially went cold in early 2020, filed away with thousands of other unsolved disappearances that plague American law enforcement agencies. Detective Santos retired 6 months later, passing Sarah's file to her replacement with a heavy heart and a promise that she would never stop hoping for resolution. The Mitchell family's initial hope had calcified into a kind of desperate faith. They refused to hold a memorial service, maintained Sarah's bedroom exactly as she had left it, and continued paying her cell phone bill on the slim chance that she might one day turn it on and call home. By 2021, David had established himself as a successful marketing executive in Chicago, specializing in digital campaigns for healthcare companies. His colleagues knew him as a dedicated professional who worked longer hours than necessary and rarely spoke about his personal life. Few knew about Sarah, and David preferred it that way. The constant questions and expressions of sympathy from well-meaning friends had become unbearable, so he had learned to compartmentalize his professional identity from the brother who still searched faces in crowded places and investigated every online missing person database he could find. The COVID-19 pandemic transformed David's world in ways that initially felt like both a blessing and a curse. Remote work eliminated his commute and gave him more flexibility, but it also meant spending more time alone with his thoughts. His Chicago apartment, once a refuge from the painful memories associated with Portland, became a workspace where he conducted meetings from the same couch, where he spent sleepless nights researching missing person cases and cold case forums. David's company, HealthBridge Marketing, had adapted quickly to the virtual environment. Client meetings that once required travel and in-person presentations now happened through video calls that connected him with healthcare professionals, pharmaceutical representatives, and medical device companies across the country. His expertise in digital health campaigns made him particularly valuable during a time when telemedicine and remote patient monitoring were experiencing unprecedented growth. The technology that facilitated these connections was both sophisticated and frustratingly unreliable. Video calls would freeze at crucial moments, audio would cut out during important presentations, and participants would appear and disappear without warning as their internet connections struggled to keep pace with the demands of a fully remote business world. David had learned to navigate these technical challenges with patience, always keeping backup slides ready and maintaining a professional demeanor even when technology failed. His typical day began with coffee and a review of client files, followed by a series of video conferences that could include anywhere from 3 to 15 participants. He had become skilled at reading facial expressions through pixelated screens, interpreting body language despite camera angles that showed only head and shoulders, and building rapport with people he had never met in person. The work was engaging enough to provide temporary distraction from his personal struggles, but quiet moments between meetings inevitably led his thoughts back to Sarah. During this period, David had developed what his therapist called hypervigilance, an exhausting state of constant alertness where his brain continuously scanned environments for any sign of his missing sister. This condition had intensified during video calls, where he found himself studying the faces of participants' family members, who occasionally wandered through the background, analyzing home decor visible behind colleagues for any clues that might connect to Sarah, and screenshot any unfamiliar faces that appeared during large group meetings. The phenomenon of Zoom bombing and unexpected appearances during video calls had become commonplace by 2021. Children would run through rooms during parent meetings, pets would leap onto desks during presentations, and spouses would unknowingly walk through camera ranges wearing inappropriate attire. These interruptions, while sometimes embarrassing, had been normalized as part of remote work culture. David had witnessed dozens of such moments, but none had prepared him for what he would see during a routine client presentation in March 2021. HealthBridge had been contracted by Meridian Health Systems, a regional hospital network, to develop a comprehensive digital marketing strategy for their new patient portal. The project represented David's largest account, with a team of 12 people across 3 states working to create campaigns that would encourage patients to use digital tools for appointment scheduling, prescription management, and communication with their healthcare providers. The work required weekly video conferences with various stakeholders, including doctors, nurses, IT specialists, and administrative staff. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Meridian's Chief Information Officer, had been leading these meetings from her home office, a professionally decorated space with medical diplomas on the walls and carefully arranged lighting that suggested she had significant experience with video conferencing. She was known for running efficient meetings and maintaining focus on project objectives, qualities that David appreciated after participating in too many virtual meetings that devolved into technical difficulties and off-topic conversations. The March 16th meeting was scheduled to review preliminary campaign concepts and gather feedback from clinical staff who would be promoting the patient portal to their patients. David had prepared extensively, creating presentation materials that demonstrated how digital marketing could complement traditional patient education efforts. He was particularly excited about a campaign concept that used patient success stories to build confidence in telemedicine services. As participants joined the call, David went through his standard routine of checking camera angles, testing his microphone, and organizing his presentation materials. The familiar faces of his colleagues appeared in their respective video windows. Dr. Walsh from her home office, Marketing Director Susan Chen from what appeared to be a spare bedroom, IT Specialist Mark Rodriguez from a space that looked like a converted garage, and several others joining from various domestic locations that had been transformed into temporary workspaces. The meeting began on schedule with Dr. Walsh providing updates on patient portal adoption rates and discussing technical challenges that might influence marketing messaging. David was taking notes and preparing to share his screen when additional participants began joining the call. This was common during larger meetings, as busy healthcare professionals often had scheduling conflicts that prevented them from joining at the designated start time. As new video windows opened, David glanced at each participant to put faces with names and roles. Most were unfamiliar medical staff whose presence had been requested by Dr. Walsh to provide clinical perspective on the marketing materials. He was focused on matching participant names with their video windows when one particular image caused him to stop breathing entirely. The video window appeared in the bottom row of David's screen, showing a woman with shoulder-length brown hair sitting in what looked like a home office or bedroom. The lighting was dim, creating shadows that partially obscured her features, but something about her appearance triggered a response so visceral that David's hands began shaking before his conscious mind could process what he was seeing. The name displayed below the video window read Amanda Chen, but the face staring back at him through the pixelated screen belonged to someone he knew better than anyone else in the world. The bone structure was identical, the same high cheekbones that their grandmother had passed down, the same slightly crooked nose from a childhood bicycle accident, the same way of tilting her head slightly to the right when concentrating. Even accounting for changes that might occur over 3 years, even considering the possibility that grief might be making him see things that weren't there, David felt certain he was looking at Sarah. His first instinct was to speak, to call out her name and demand an explanation, but the meeting was continuing around him with Dr. Walsh discussing patient privacy concerns and implementation timelines. David forced himself to remain silent, while his heart pounded so loudly he was certain other participants could hear it through his microphone. He minimized all other video windows to focus exclusively on the woman who called herself Amanda Chen, studying every detail he could discern through the inadequate resolution of the video call. She appeared older than Sarah would have been, not dramatically, but in subtle ways that suggested the passage of time under difficult circumstances. Her hair was shorter and styled differently, and she wore makeup in a way that Sarah never had, with bold eyeliner and lipstick that changed the shape of her mouth. But the eyes were unmistakable. They were Sarah's eyes, with the same flecks of gold around the pupils and the same habit of narrowing slightly when she was thinking carefully about something. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching us from and the exact time you're listening to this story. We're interested in knowing what places and at what times of day or night these documented reports reach. As David watched, Amanda Chen participated normally in the meeting discussion, asking questions about patient data security and offering insights about user interface design that suggested familiarity with healthcare technology. Her voice was different, slightly higher pitched than Sarah's had been, with an accent or speech pattern that David couldn't immediately identify. She seemed comfortable with the technology and confident in the professional setting, characteristics that aligned with Sarah's personality, but in a context that made no sense given Sarah's background in food service and her plans for nursing school. The rational part of David's mind began generating explanations for what he was seeing. Perhaps this was an extraordinary coincidence, a stranger who happened to bear a striking resemblance to his missing sister. Perhaps the poor video quality and his own desperate hope were combining to create an illusion where none existed. Perhaps his years of searching faces in crowds and studying missing person databases had finally caused him to lose his ability to distinguish between Sarah and other women who shared some of her physical characteristics. But as the meeting progressed, and David continued watching Amanda Chen, more details emerged that strengthened his conviction rather than weakening it. She had the same habit of touching her neck when she was nervous, the same way of pausing before answering difficult questions, and the same slight southern accent that Sarah had developed during a semester abroad in college. Most convincingly, she bore a small scar above her left eyebrow that was visible despite the poor video quality. A scar that Sarah had gotten during a childhood accident with a tree branch while playing in their backyard. David began taking screenshots discreetly, using keyboard shortcuts to capture images without drawing attention to his actions. The technology was imperfect, producing blurry images that would likely be useless for any kind of formal identification, but he felt compelled to document what he was seeing. Each screenshot represented potential evidence that Sarah was alive, evidence that could finally provide the answers his family had been seeking for years. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, during which David struggled to participate in discussions about campaign messaging and budget allocation, while simultaneously conducting what felt like the most important surveillance of his life. He managed to ask appropriate questions and provide relevant input, but his attention was entirely focused on studying Amanda Chen's every gesture and expression for additional confirmation of her identity. When Dr. Walsh announced that the meeting would conclude with scheduling for the next review session, David felt a surge of panic. If this video call ended without him finding a way to contact Amanda Chen directly, he might lose the only lead he'd had in Sarah's case since her disappearance. He needed more time to study her appearance, more opportunities to hear her voice, and most importantly, some way to investigate her identity without alerting her to his suspicions. As participants began saying goodbye and leaving the call, David made a quick decision that would change everything. Instead of ending his own connection immediately, He waited to see if Amanda Chen would remain online after others had left, hoping for an opportunity to speak with her privately. His plan was vague and potentially disastrous, but the possibility of letting Sarah disappear again was unthinkable. Amanda Chen seemed to be having technical difficulties with her connection, remaining visible on the call several seconds after most other participants had logged off. David could see her moving around in her chair and apparently clicking on various controls, possibly trying to end her own connection or dealing with frozen software. This was his chance to make contact, but he had no idea what to say or how to approach someone who might be his missing sister, living under an assumed identity. The moment Amanda Chen's video window finally disappeared from the call, David began what would become the most intensive investigation of his life. His hands were still shaking as he immediately opened a new document and began recording every detail he could remember from the video call. The name Amanda Chen displayed beneath her image, her apparent familiarity with healthcare technology, the professional manner in which she had participated in discussions about patient data management, and most importantly, every physical detail that had convinced him he was looking at Sarah. David's first step was to contact Healthbridge's IT department to request a recording of the meeting, claiming he needed to review technical specifications that had been discussed. This was standard practice for important client calls, and the request didn't raise any suspicions among his colleagues. However, when the recording arrived in his email 2 hours later, David discovered that the video quality was even worse than what he had experienced during the live call. The compression required for file storage had degraded the image to the point where individual faces were barely recognizable, making it impossible to use the recording as definitive evidence of Amanda Chen's appearance. Frustrated but undeterred, David began researching Amanda Chen through every online platform and professional database he could access. His marketing background had given him expertise in digital research and social media investigation, skills that proved invaluable as he attempted to piece together the identity of the woman from the video call. His search began with LinkedIn, where he found 3 profiles for women named Amanda Chen in healthcare-related positions, but none of the profile photos matched the face he had seen during the meeting. The absence of a strong digital footprint for Amanda Chen was itself suspicious. In 2021, most healthcare professionals maintained some kind of online presence for networking and professional development purposes. The fact that he couldn't locate clear information about Amanda Chen's background, education, or career history suggested either an unusually private individual or someone who had deliberately minimized their digital footprint, a choice that might make sense for someone living under an assumed identity. David's next approach was to contact Meridian Health Systems directly, but he needed a plausible reason for inquiring about a specific employee without revealing his true motivations. He decided to pose as a healthcare recruiter who had been impressed by Amanda Chen's insights during the video call and wanted to discuss potential career opportunities with her. This strategy required creating a fake recruiting company and developing a convincing cover story. But David's desperation outweighed his concerns about the ethical implications of deception. When he called Meridian's Human Resources Department, David learned that Amanda Chen was listed as a contract consultant rather than a full-time employee, which explained why she hadn't appeared in their standard employee directory. The HR representative was able to confirm that Amanda Chen had been working with their IT department on electronic medical record implementation, but she couldn't provide contact information due to company privacy policies. However, she did mention that Amanda Chen's contract was scheduled to conclude at the end of March, just 2 weeks after the video call where David had seen her. This information created a new sense of urgency. If Amanda Chen was indeed Sarah living under a false identity, and if her contract with Meridian was ending soon, she might disappear again before David could make contact. He needed a more direct approach, but any attempt to reach out to her through official channels would likely alert her to his interest and potentially drive her into hiding if she was deliberately concealing her identity. David decided to take a significant risk by reaching out to Dr. Walsh directly. He crafted a carefully worded email explaining that he was interested in connecting with Amanda Chen about potential collaboration opportunities, emphasizing her impressive technical knowledge and professional demeanor during the recent video call. He tried to strike a balance between legitimate business interest and personal curiosity, hoping Dr. Walsh would be willing to forward his contact information without asking too many questions about his motivations. Dr. Walsh's response arrived the following day, but it contained disappointing news. She explained that Amanda Chen had been brought into the project by their IT consulting firm and that she had limited direct contact with her. However, she was able to provide the name of the consulting company, Tech Health Solutions, and suggested that David contact them directly if he was interested in Amanda Chen's services. Tech Health Solutions proved to be a small firm specializing in healthcare technology implementation, with offices in 3 states and a team of approximately 20 consultants. When David called their main number, he was transferred to a project coordinator named Mike Stevens, who confirmed that Amanda Chen was one of their contractors, but explained that he couldn't share her personal contact information without her permission. Stevens offered to forward David's message to Amanda Chen and let her decide whether to respond. David agreed to this arrangement, composing a message that he hoped would intrigue Amanda Chen enough to respond while not revealing his true identity or suspicions. He described himself as a marketing professional who had been impressed by her insights during the Meridian Health Systems meeting and expressed interest in discussing potential collaboration on healthcare technology projects. The message was deliberately vague about specific opportunities, but he included his direct phone number and email address with a request for Amanda Chen to contact him at her convenience. 3 days passed without any response from Amanda Chen, and David began to worry that his message had either failed to reach her or had raised suspicions about his motivations. During this waiting period, he continued his independent investigation, using public records databases and social media platforms to search for any traces of Amanda Chen's history prior to her work with healthcare consulting firms. His research revealed fragments of information that seemed to support the possibility that Amanda Chen was indeed living under an assumed identity. Her earliest professional references dated back only to 2019, just 1 year after Sarah's disappearance. Her educational background was vague, with references to relevant experience and technical training, but no specific degrees or institutions. Most tellingly, he could find no social media presence for Amanda Chen prior to 2020, despite the fact that most people of her apparent age had established online profiles much earlier. The more David learned about Amanda Chen's background, the more convinced he became that she was Sarah using a false identity. But this possibility raised new questions that were almost as troubling as Sarah's original disappearance. If she was alive and working under an assumed name, why hadn't she contacted her family? What had happened during the 3 years since her disappearance that would drive her to create an entirely new identity? And perhaps most importantly, was she hiding from someone or something that might still pose a danger to her safety? On the 4th day after sending his message through Tech Health Solutions, David received an email that made his heart race. The sender was listed as hnatechhealth.com, and the subject line read, "Re-collaboration opportunity." The message was brief and professional, thanking him for his interest and suggesting a phone call to discuss potential projects. She provided a phone number and indicated that she was available for conversations between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern Time on weekdays. David immediately called the number, his hands trembling as he dialed. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered with a simple, "Hello, this is Amanda. Despite her attempt to modify her speech patterns and the passage of 3 years, David recognized Sarah's voice instantly. The timbre was the same. The slight pause before speaking was identical, and even her way of pronouncing certain consonants matched his memories perfectly. "Hi, Amanda. This is David Mitchell from Healthbridge Marketing," he managed to say, forcing his voice to remain steady and professional. "Thank you for responding to my message about potential collaboration opportunities. I was really impressed by your contributions during the Meridian Health Systems meeting last week." "Thank you," Amanda replied, and David could hear what sounded like nervousness in her voice. "I appreciate your interest in my work. What kind of collaboration were you thinking about?" David had prepared for this conversation, but actually hearing Sarah's voice made it difficult to concentrate on his rehearsed talking points. He launched into a discussion about healthcare marketing challenges and the importance of technical expertise in developing effective digital campaigns. As they talked, he found himself analyzing every word she spoke for additional confirmation of her identity, while simultaneously trying to maintain the facade of a legitimate business conversation. Amanda Chen demonstrated extensive knowledge of healthcare technology systems, electronic medical records, and patient data management, expertise that seemed far beyond what Sarah could have acquired during her years working as a barista and planning to attend nursing school. This technical competence initially made David question his identification, but as the conversation continued, he began to notice other details that strengthened his conviction. She mentioned having worked on similar projects in the Pacific Northwest, without specifying exactly where, a geographical reference that aligned with Sarah's last known location in Portland. When discussing patient privacy concerns, she used specific examples that suggested first-hand experience with Oregon's healthcare system. Most convincingly, she made a casual reference to preferring coffee from local roasters over national chains, mentioning that she had worked in the coffee industry before transitioning to healthcare technology. The conversation lasted 45 minutes, during which David gathered enough information to convince himself that Amanda Chen was definitely Sarah, while also learning about the life she had apparently built during the 3 years since her disappearance. She spoke about healthcare technology work with passion and expertise, described traveling for consulting projects across multiple states, and mentioned living in a small town where everyone knows each other, without providing specific location details. When the call ended, David felt both elated and overwhelmed. Finding Sarah alive was the answer to years of prayers and desperate searching, but her apparent decision to live under a false identity while her family suffered through the uncertainty of her disappearance created new emotional complications. He was hurt that she hadn't contacted her family, confused about what could have driven her to such extreme measures, and worried about confronting her with his knowledge of her true identity. David spent the next several hours researching strategies for approaching missing persons who might have chosen to disappear voluntarily. His online research led him to forums for families of missing adults, where he learned that some disappearances were indeed voluntary, and that missing persons sometimes chose to cut contact with their families due to abuse, mental health issues, debt problems, or fear of dangerous situations. The possibility that Sarah had chosen to disappear rather than being kidnapped or murdered was actually a relief, but it also suggested that his family might have been unknowingly complicit in whatever circumstances had driven her away. He decided that his next step should be a more direct approach. Rather than continuing to maintain the pretense of business collaboration, David felt that he needed to reveal his identity to Amanda Chen and give her an opportunity to explain her situation. This strategy carried significant risks. If she was indeed Sarah and had chosen to disappear for safety reasons, his contact might put her in danger. If she wasn't Sarah and he was mistaken about her identity, his accusations could destroy her professional reputation and potentially result in legal consequences for harassment. David composed an email that balanced directness with sensitivity, explaining that he believed Amanda Chen might be his sister Sarah Mitchell, who had disappeared from Portland in 2018. He provided details about Sarah's disappearance that wouldn't be publicly available, described the impact her absence had had on their family, and assured Amanda that his primary concern was her safety and well-being rather than pressuring her to return home. He emphasized that if she had chosen to create a new life for legitimate reasons, he respected her decision, but hoped she could at least let their parents know that she was alive and safe. The email was the most difficult message David had ever written, requiring multiple drafts as he struggled to find words that would convince Sarah to trust him if she was indeed Amanda Chen, while also acknowledging the possibility that he was wrong about her identity. He concluded the message by providing his personal phone number and offering to meet her anywhere she felt comfortable, emphasizing that his only goal was to understand what had happened and to help in whatever way she needed. After sending the email, David experienced a mixture of anticipation and dread that made it impossible to focus on work or daily activities. He had initiated what could be the final phase of a 3-year mystery, but he had no way of predicting how Amanda Chen would respond to his direct confrontation about her identity. If she was Sarah, this could be the beginning of her reintegration with their family and the end of years of uncertainty. If she wasn't Sarah, or if she was Sarah but felt threatened by his discovery, this could be the end of his only lead, and potentially the last time he would ever hear from the woman he believed to be his sister. Amanda Chen's response to David's email arrived 18 hours later, but it wasn't the message he had expected or hoped for. Instead of addressing his accusations about her identity, she wrote a brief, professional note stating that she believed there had been some kind of misunderstanding and that she was not the person he was looking for. She wished him luck in finding his sister and requested that he not contact her again, as continued communication would be inappropriate and potentially problematic for her professional reputation. The message was polite, but firm, and it left David feeling more confused than ever. If Amanda Chen truly wasn't Sarah, her response was entirely reasonable and appropriate. But if she was Sarah and was trying to maintain her false identity, this type of denial would also be expected. The formal tone of her message seemed inconsistent with the warmth and personality he had detected during their phone conversation, suggesting that she might be deliberately trying to create distance between them. David decided that he needed additional evidence before accepting Amanda Chen's denial or pursuing more aggressive investigation tactics. He began researching tech health solutions more thoroughly, looking for any information about how Amanda Chen had been hired, what qualifications she had presented, and whether there were any irregularities in her employment history that might suggest identity fraud. His investigation revealed that Tech Health Solutions was a relatively new company, established in 2019, and that they had hired several consultants with non-traditional backgrounds during the rapid expansion of telemedicine services during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Chen's hiring appeared to coincide with increased demand for healthcare technology expertise, and her references were from smaller consulting firms and temporary employment agencies rather than major healthcare institutions or technology companies. David also discovered that Amanda Chen had been working exclusively on short-term contracts that rarely lasted more than 6 months, a pattern that would make it easier to maintain a false identity by avoiding the deeper background checks and long-term relationships that might reveal inconsistencies in her personal history. Her work had taken her to healthcare systems in Oregon, Washington, California, and Colorado, all states where Sarah might reasonably have traveled if she were trying to rebuild her life while staying in a familiar geographic region. If this case has already hooked you, leave a like. It helps the story of Sarah Mitchell reach more people. Armed with this information, David made a decision that crossed ethical boundaries, but felt justified by the extraordinary circumstances. He hired a private investigator, the same James Crawford who had worked on Sarah's case 3 years earlier, to conduct a more thorough investigation of Amanda Chen's background. Crawford was initially reluctant to take the case, explaining that investigating someone who had explicitly requested no further contact could constitute harassment. But David's description of the video call evidence and his certainty about Amanda Chen's identity convinced the investigator to proceed cautiously. Crawford's investigation began with public record searches for Amanda Chen in all the states where she had worked. This research revealed several interesting anomalies. Amanda Chen appeared to have no credit history prior to 2019, no educational records that could be verified through standard databases, and no driving record in any state where she claimed to have lived. Most significantly, Crawford was unable to locate any birth certificate or social security number associated with the name Amanda Chen that matched her approximate age and background. These findings strongly suggested that Amanda Chen was indeed using a false identity, but they didn't conclusively prove that she was Sarah Mitchell. Crawford recommended DNA testing if David could obtain a sample from Amanda Chen, but this would require either her cooperation or covert collection methods that would be both illegal and difficult to execute. Instead, Crawford suggested a different approach, attempting to verify Sarah's identity through photographic comparison using facial recognition software. Crawford had access to advanced forensic tools through his former law enforcement contacts, including facial recognition systems that could account for changes in appearance due to aging, weight fluctuations, and intentional disguise efforts. If David could provide additional photographs of Amanda Chen from the video calls or other sources, these systems could compare her features to photographs of Sarah and provide a statistical assessment of the likelihood that they were the same person. David realized that he needed more recent images of Amanda Chen to make this comparison possible. He began monitoring Tech Health Solutions' social media accounts and professional websites, hoping to find photographs from conferences, training events, or company gatherings where Amanda Chen might appear. His search was successful when he discovered that Amanda Chen had presented at a healthcare technology conference in Denver 3 weeks earlier, and several photographs from the event were available on the conference website and social media pages. These new photographs provided much clearer images of Amanda Chen than the video call screenshots David had captured. Even accounting for changes in hairstyle, makeup, and overall appearance, the resemblance to Sarah was unmistakable. Crawford's facial recognition analysis confirmed David's visual assessment, indicating a 94% probability that Amanda Chen and Sarah Mitchell were the same person based on bone structure, facial proportions, and distinctive features. With this confirmation, David faced a crucial decision about how to proceed. He now had compelling evidence that Sarah was alive and working under an assumed name, but he still didn't know why she had chosen to disappear or whether approaching her directly might put her in danger. Crawford advised caution, suggesting that Sarah's use of a false identity might indicate that she was hiding from someone or something that posed a genuine threat to her safety. David decided that he needed to make one final attempt at direct communication, but with a different approach that acknowledged the seriousness of her situation while offering support rather than demands for explanation. He composed a new email to Amanda Chen that began with an acknowledgement that she had requested no further contact, but explained that he had obtained evidence confirming her identity as his sister Sarah, and that his primary concern was her well-being rather than convincing her to return home. This message was more emotional and personal than his previous communications, describing the impact her disappearance had had on their family, while emphasizing that they loved her unconditionally and wanted to help her with whatever circumstances had driven her to create a new identity. David offered to meet her anywhere she felt safe, promised to respect whatever boundaries she needed to maintain, and assured her that he would not share information about her location or new identity with anyone, including their parents, without her explicit permission. 3 days after David sent his final email to Amanda Chen, his phone rang at 11:30 p.m. with a call from an unknown number. When he answered, he heard a voice he hadn't heard in over 3 years whisper, "David, it's me." "It's Sarah." The conversation that followed would forever change David's understanding of what had happened to his sister and why she had chosen to disappear rather than seek help from her family. Sarah was crying as she spoke, alternating between relief at finally being able to tell someone the truth and terror about the potential consequences of revealing her location and new identity. Sarah explained that her disappearance in 2018 hadn't been a random crime or a voluntary adventure, but the result of a situation that had spiraled completely out of her control. During her final months working at the coffee shop in Portland, Sarah had unwittingly become involved with a customer who was using the business as a front for money laundering operations connected to drug trafficking. Marcus, her co-worker, who had been the last person to see her before she disappeared, had been recruited by this customer to use the coffee shop's daily cash deposits to clean drug money. Initially, Sarah had no knowledge of these activities. Marcus had simply asked her to occasionally take cash deposits to the bank for him when his schedule was busy, a favor that seemed harmless and helpful to a co-worker she considered a friend. Sarah had made these deposits dozens of times over several months, unknowingly carrying laundered money and becoming an unwitting participant in the criminal operation. The situation became dangerous when federal agents began investigating the money laundering scheme. Sarah learned about her involvement when Marcus approached her in a panic, explaining that they were both likely to be arrested and that the people behind the operation had a reputation for eliminating witnesses who might cooperate with law enforcement. Marcus had already decided to disappear, and he urged Sarah to do the same, warning her that staying in Portland would result in either arrest or much worse consequences from the criminals who had been using them. Sarah faced an impossible choice: contact law enforcement and risk retaliation from dangerous criminals who knew her identity and location, or disappear voluntarily and allow her family to believe she had been kidnapped or murdered. Marcus provided her with contact information for people who could help her create a false identity, but warned her that using these services would mean cutting all ties with her previous life permanently. The decision to disappear was the most difficult choice Sarah had ever made, but her fear of the criminals involved in the money laundering operation outweighed her concern for her family's emotional well-being. She believed that disappearing would protect both herself and her parents from potential retaliation, while contacting law enforcement might put everyone she loved at risk. Marcus had described the people behind the operation as ruthless individuals who had killed witnesses in similar situations, making cooperation with police seem like a death sentence. On the night of her disappearance, Sarah had met Marcus at the diner, where her car was later found. He provided her with $5,000 in cash, contact information for people who could help her establish a new identity, and advice about how to travel without being detected by law enforcement or criminal organizations. Sarah left her car at the diner and traveled by bus to Seattle, where she spent several weeks living in a homeless shelter while making contact with the identity specialists Marcus had recommended. The process of creating a new identity was more complex and expensive than Sarah had anticipated. She needed not only false identification documents, but also a complete background story that would withstand scrutiny from employers and government agencies. The people who helped her were professionals who specialized in providing new identities for witnesses in danger, but their services cost most of Sarah's savings and required her to cut all ties with her previous life. Amanda Chen's identity was carefully constructed to include educational and employment history that would allow Sarah to work in healthcare technology, a field she had chosen because it offered good employment opportunities and the possibility of remote work that would make it easier to avoid detection. Sarah had always been interested in healthcare, and her plans to attend nursing school had given her basic knowledge that she was able to expand through online courses and self-directed learning. The years since her disappearance had been lonely and frightening, but Sarah had gradually built a life that felt secure and purposeful. Her work as a healthcare technology consultant allowed her to help improve patient care, while maintaining the flexibility to move frequently and avoid establishing deep personal relationships that might compromise her secret identity. She had developed expertise in electronic medical records and patient data management, skills that were in high demand and allowed her to command good salaries as a contract consultant. Sarah's greatest regret was the pain her disappearance had caused her family, but she had convinced herself that allowing them to grieve her as dead was preferable to putting them in danger by revealing her situation. She had occasionally searched for information about her family online, learning about David's career success and their parents' involvement in missing person advocacy, but she had never attempted to contact them directly for fear of compromising her new identity or putting them at risk. The video call where David had recognized her had been a moment of pure terror for Sarah, but also a relief that her secret was finally known by someone who loved her. She explained that she had immediately recognized David during the call, but had hoped that the poor video quality would prevent him from identifying her. When he began investigating her identity and sent the initial email mentioning potential collaboration opportunities, she realized that he was suspicious, but hoped she could maintain her cover by limiting their interactions. David's final email, which included specific details about her disappearance and expressed unconditional love and support, convinced Sarah that she could trust him with the truth. She was exhausted from years of living in isolation and fear, and the possibility of reconnecting with at least one family member outweighed her concerns about maintaining her false identity. As Sarah finished explaining her story, David felt a mixture of relief, anger, and overwhelming sadness. Relief that Sarah was alive and safe, anger that criminals had forced her to choose between her safety and her family's peace of mind, and sadness for the years they had all lost to circumstances beyond their control. He assured Sarah that he loved her unconditionally and that his primary concern was her continued safety, not pressuring her to return to their family before she felt secure about the criminal threat that had driven her into hiding. Over the following weeks, David and Sarah established a careful pattern of communication that allowed them to rebuild their relationship while protecting her new identity and location. They spoke by phone several times per week, with Sarah calling from prepaid phones, and David being cautious about discussing her situation over any communication method that might be monitored or recorded. Sarah had learned to be extremely security conscious during her years in hiding, and she taught David techniques for maintaining their contact while minimizing the risk of discovery. Through these conversations, David learned more about the life Sarah had built as Amanda Chen. She was living in a small town in Colorado, renting a house under her assumed name and working remotely for healthcare consulting firms across the western United States. Her work was fulfilling and well compensated, and she had developed a few carefully maintained friendships with neighbors and colleagues who knew nothing about her real background. Sarah had also been following news about the money laundering investigation that had driven her into hiding, learning through online research that several arrests had been made in 2019 and 2020. Marcus had also disappeared and was believed by law enforcement to be either dead or living under an assumed identity in another country. The criminal organization that had been using the coffee shop for money laundering had been largely dismantled, but Sarah wasn't certain whether all the dangerous individuals involved had been arrested or whether they might still pose a threat if they learned of her location. David found himself in an emotionally complex situation. He was overjoyed to have found Sarah alive and to be rebuilding their relationship, but he was also struggling with the knowledge that their parents were still suffering from the uncertainty of her disappearance. Robert and Linda Mitchell had dedicated their lives to searching for Sarah and advocating for missing persons, and David knew that learning she was alive would bring them tremendous relief. However, he also understood Sarah's concerns about security and her need to maintain her false identity until she was certain the threats that had driven her into hiding no longer existed. After discussing the situation extensively with Sarah, David convinced her to allow him to share limited information with their parents. They developed a plan where David would tell Robert and Linda that he had received credible information indicating that Sarah was alive and safe, but that he couldn't provide details about her location or circumstances for security reasons. This partial disclosure would allow their parents to know that Sarah was alive without compromising her safety or forcing her to make contact before she was ready. The conversation with his parents was one of the most difficult discussions David had ever had. He called them together on a video call and began by explaining that he had information about Sarah that he needed to share carefully. When he told them that Sarah was alive and safe, their reaction was a mixture of overwhelming relief, joy, and frustration that they couldn't have more details or direct contact with their daughter. Robert immediately began asking logistical questions about why Sarah couldn't contact them directly and what circumstances had led to her disappearance. Linda was primarily concerned with Sarah's emotional and physical well-being, wanting to know whether she was happy, healthy, and in need of any support their family could provide. David answered their questions as thoroughly as possible while maintaining the boundaries Sarah had established, explaining that she had been forced to disappear due to a dangerous situation that was not of her making and that she was working to resolve the circumstances that prevented her from returning home. The partial reunion with their parents was emotionally satisfying for Sarah, who was able to hear secondhand about their love and support while maintaining the security of her false identity. David served as an intermediary, sharing messages and updates between Sarah and their parents while carefully avoiding any information that might compromise her location or new life. This arrangement wasn't ideal for anyone involved, but it represented significant progress from the years of complete uncertainty that had preceded David's discovery. As months passed, Sarah began taking small steps toward potentially reintegrating with her family more directly. She researched the current status of the criminal investigation that had driven her into hiding, consulted with attorneys about the legal implications of her situation, and explored options for safely transitioning back to her real identity if circumstances permitted. The legal research revealed that Sarah's unwitting involvement in the money laundering operation might not result in criminal charges if she cooperated with law enforcement, but it would require her to testify about her knowledge of the scheme and potentially put her in danger from any remaining members of the criminal organization. The attorneys Sarah consulted advised her to remain in hiding until she could be certain that all dangerous individuals connected to the case had been arrested or eliminated as threats. David began working with private investigator James Crawford to monitor the ongoing status of the federal investigation into the money laundering scheme. Crawford's law enforcement contacts were able to provide updates about arrests, convictions, and the current threat level posed by remaining members of the criminal organization. This information would be crucial for Sarah's decision about whether it was safe to reveal her true identity and potentially return to her family. During this period, Sarah also began therapy with a counselor who specialized in trauma and identity issues, working to process the psychological impact of years in hiding and prepare for the possibility of reintegrating with her previous life. The counselor helped Sarah understand that her decision to disappear had been a reasonable response to an impossible situation, but also helped her address the guilt and isolation she had experienced during her years as Amanda Chen. David found that his relationship with Sarah was stronger in some ways than it had been before her disappearance. Their shared experience of the search and reunion had created a deep bond, and their regular conversations allowed them to connect on a level that might not have been possible under normal circumstances. However, he also struggled with the ongoing secrecy required to protect Sarah's safety and the continued pain their parents experienced from being unable to have direct contact with their daughter. As the one-year anniversary of David's discovery approached, Sarah began seriously considering whether it might be safe to take more direct steps toward reunion with their family. The criminal investigation appeared to be concluded, with most key figures either arrested or confirmed dead, and Sarah's attorneys believed that the legal risks of revealing her identity were manageable if handled properly. By the spring of 2022, Sarah had reached a decision that would change everything once again. After extensive consultation with attorneys, security experts, and her therapist, she determined that the threats that had driven her into hiding had diminished enough to justify taking steps toward reclaiming her real identity and reuniting with her family. The process would be complex and potentially dangerous, but Sarah felt that the psychological cost of continuing to live as Amanda Chen had begun to outweigh the security benefits of maintaining her false identity. The first step in Sarah's return involved working with federal law enforcement to provide information about the money laundering operation that had destroyed her previous life. Sarah's attorneys had negotiated an immunity agreement in exchange for her cooperation, but this meant she would need to testify about her unwitting involvement in the criminal scheme and potentially face cross-examination from defense attorneys representing the individuals who had been arrested. David accompanied Sarah to her initial meeting with federal agents, which took place in a secure facility in Denver. Sarah had spent weeks preparing for this interview, working with her attorneys to organize documents and memories from her time working at the Portland coffee shop. The agents were particularly interested in her interactions with Marcus and the customer who had orchestrated the money laundering scheme, as well as any detail she could provide about the threats that had convinced her to disappear. The federal agents confirmed that most of the key figures in the criminal organization had been arrested or killed during law enforcement operations, but they also acknowledged that some lower-level associates might still pose a potential threat if they learned of Sarah's survival and cooperation. The agents agreed to provide Sarah with security briefings and threat assessments as the legal proceedings continued, but they couldn't guarantee her complete safety if she chose to resume her real identity. With law enforcement cooperation established, Sarah began the complex process of transitioning back from Amanda Chen to Sarah Mitchell. This involved working with government agencies to restore her official identity, address tax and social security issues that had accumulated during her absence, and establish documentation that would allow her to reclaim her previous life. The process was complicated by the fact that Sarah had been declared legally dead in 2021, requiring court proceedings to reverse this declaration and restore her legal status. Sarah's first direct contact with her parents in over 4 years took place on a video call arranged by David, with security precautions that included encrypted communication software and protocols to protect her location. The reunion was emotionally overwhelming for everyone involved, with tears, expressions of love, and careful conversations about what had happened during the years of separation. Robert and Linda Mitchell had aged visibly during the years of searching for their daughter, but seeing Sarah alive and healthy gave them an energy and hope that David hadn't seen since before her disappearance. They were initially angry about the circumstances that had forced Sarah to choose between her safety and their peace of mind, but their primary emotion was gratitude that she had survived, and was finally able to come home. The conversation revealed how dramatically all their lives had changed during Sarah's absence. Robert had become an expert on missing person cases and had helped several other families navigate similar situations, while Linda had established a support group for parents of missing adults that now included over 200 members. David had built a successful career, but had never been able to fully invest in personal relationships because of his ongoing grief and search for his sister. Sarah learned that her disappearance had inspired her family to become advocates for missing persons, but it had also taken a tremendous toll on their physical and emotional health. Robert had developed anxiety and depression that required ongoing treatment, while Linda had experienced health problems that their doctors attributed to chronic stress. David had succeeded professionally, but had struggled with relationships and had never been able to fully commit to the life he wanted because part of him was always searching for Sarah. As they talked, Sarah realized that her decision to protect her family by disappearing had actually caused them years of suffering that might have been avoided if she had chosen to trust them with the truth about her dangerous situation. This recognition was painful, but it also helped her understand that secrecy, even when motivated by love and protection, could sometimes cause more harm than honesty about difficult circumstances. The gradual process of Sarah's return to her family was complicated by practical considerations that hadn't existed before her disappearance. She needed to find employment under her real name, establish credit and financial accounts that had been dormant for years, and rebuild social connections that had been severed when she disappeared. The skills she had developed as Amanda Chen were valuable, but explaining her employment history during the missing years required careful coordination with her attorneys to avoid compromising ongoing legal proceedings. Sarah decided to move back to the Pacific Northwest, but not to Portland where her disappearance had occurred. Instead, she chose Seattle, where she could be close enough to visit her parents regularly while maintaining some distance from the location of her traumatic experiences. David helped her find an apartment and begin the process of re-establishing her life, serving as a bridge between her new circumstances and the family relationships she was rebuilding. The legal proceedings against the members of the criminal organization continued for several months, with Sarah providing testimony that helped prosecutors secure convictions against several key figures. The process was stressful and occasionally frightening, but Sarah felt that her cooperation was important for preventing other innocent people from being victimized by similar schemes. Her testimony was delivered via secure video link to protect her identity and location, but she still experienced anxiety about potential retaliation from associates of the convicted criminals. As 2022 progressed, Sarah began to feel more confident about her safety and her decision to reclaim her real identity. The legal proceedings were concluding successfully. Law enforcement continued to provide reassuring threat assessments, and she was building a new life that combined the independence she had developed as Amanda Chen with the family relationships she had missed during her years in hiding. Sarah found work as a healthcare technology consultant under her real name, using the expertise she had developed during her years as Amanda Chen, while being honest with employers about her unique background and employment history. Her experience with electronic medical records and patient data management made her valuable to healthcare organizations, and her story of overcoming dangerous circumstances to rebuild her life resonated with employers who valued resilience and determination. The reunion process wasn't without challenges. Sarah struggled with guilt about the years of pain her disappearance had caused her family, while Robert and Linda had difficulty understanding why she hadn't trusted them enough to ask for help with her dangerous situation. David served as a mediator in these conversations, helping everyone process their emotions while rebuilding relationships that had been interrupted by trauma and separation. Family therapy helped them work through these issues, with a counselor who specialized in reunification after long-term separations. The therapist helped them understand that Sarah's decision to disappear had been a trauma response to an impossible situation, and that blame and guilt were less important than moving forward together as a family that had survived an extraordinary ordeal. By the end of 2022, Sarah felt that she had successfully returned to her real life while maintaining the strength and independence she had developed during her years as Amanda Chen. She had rebuilt relationships with her family, established a successful career, and found a sense of peace about the difficult decisions she had made during the most challenging period of her life. The experience had changed all of them permanently. Sarah had learned that she was capable of surviving and thriving under the most difficult circumstances, but she had also learned the importance of trusting the people who loved her. David had discovered that his persistence and love for his sister could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, but he had also learned about the complex factors that could drive people to make desperate choices. Robert and Linda had become advocates for other families experiencing similar tragedies, but they had also learned that love sometimes meant accepting difficult truths about the people you care about most. As Sarah settled into her new life in Seattle, she occasionally thought about the other missing persons whose families were still searching for answers. Her story had a happy ending that many similar cases would never have, and she felt a responsibility to use her experience to help other families navigate the complex emotions and practical challenges of dealing with long-term disappearances. The case that had begun with a routine video call during a pandemic had evolved into a story of survival, family love, and the complex ways that dangerous circumstances could tear families apart and bring them back together. Sarah's disappearance had been traumatic for everyone involved, but her eventual return had also demonstrated the power of persistence, love, and hope in overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following the story of Sarah Mitchell. We'll see you in the next video. The digital age had given David the tools to find his missing sister, but it had also created the circumstances that allowed Sarah to disappear and rebuild her life under a false identity. Technology had both separated them and brought them back together, proving that even in an interconnected world, people could still vanish completely if they had sufficient motivation and resources. Sarah's story was ultimately one of survival and family resilience, demonstrating that love could endure even the most challenging separations and that hope, persistence, and careful investigation could sometimes achieve what seemed impossible.